All right, I've heard enough. Come on, everybody, just give it to me now, and then we'll get it. Okay. Anyone else? If you want to make fun of my tripod, do it now. Let's get it over with. It's cathartic.
Okay, good morning, everyone. We're here this morning for a workshop as part of the board's rulemaking process regarding sound from wind-powered electric generation facilities pursuant to Section 12A of Act 174. The purpose of this workshop is to discuss the technical aspects of the board's proposed rule on sound levels from wind generation facilities. We've received 6 requests to present at the workshop, and based on those requests, we've set out a schedule. I think all of you got a copy of that earlier. There are presentations from Vermont Public Interest Research Group, Vermonters for a Clean Environment, Renewable Energy Vermont, Star Wind Turbines. Then we'll take a lunch break, and then we'll resume with Resource Systems Group, the Department of Public Service. We also got a late request from Les Blomberg to present on behalf of Paul Bruja, and we will allow him to do that if there's time. We're going to try to hold everybody to the time. We're going to hold everybody to the time that was allotted to them. So be sure you keep that in mind as you're going through your presentation. Vermont Public Interest Research Group has 20 minutes. Vermonters for a Clean Environment has 40 minutes. Renewable Energy Vermont has 20 minutes. Star Wind Turbines has 35 minutes. We're going to take a 1-hour lunch break, and then Resource Systems Group has 60 minutes, and the Department of Public Service has 30 minutes. And then Mr. Blomberg, if there's time, will go. And I don't know off the top of my head, remember how much time you asked for, but 15 to 20 minutes. So that's the plan for the day. I'd also just like to remind everybody that final written comments on the proposed rule must be filed by May 11th, and that the target date for making the filing with the Secretary of State and the Legislative Committee is May 16th. So we've got a pretty aggressive schedule to deal with. So with that, I'd like everybody in the room to identify themselves. I'll start on my left here with the department.
Aaron Kasicki on behalf of the Department of Public Service. I'll be joined later in the day by Payam Ashtiani of Air Acoustics Engineering Limited. Mr. Ashtiani will be attending telephonically. I appreciate the board's willingness to allow him to do that.
And I think the phone line is open now because we got requests for people to be able to call in and so they can listen in. So there may be people on the phone from the public who are listening.
David Trask, Vermont Department of Health.
Austin Davis, Renewable Energy Vermont.
Howard Quinn, sound consultant representing Star Wind Turbines.
Jason Day, Star Wind Turbines.
Donnie Schnorr, Vermont Power.
Penny Duncan, RSG.
Sash Lewis from Dunfield Saunders.
Greg Pierce, private citizen.
Paula Kane, private citizen.
Sally Colopy, private citizen. Paula Pearsall, private citizen.
Bill Kaplan, Fundamental Energy.
Dustin Lang, resident of Swanton, Vermont.
Elizabeth Cooper with Vermonters for a Clean Environment.
Christine Lang, private citizen.
John Brabant, Vermonters for a Clean Environment.
Penny Doobie.
Oh, I'm sorry, Penny.
Private citizen. Thanks.
Lynette Combs, private citizen.
Hal Cohen, Department of Public Service.
Howard Royce Tisman, Vermont Public Radio.
Okay, back to the table.
Olivia Campbell Anderson, Renewable Energy Vermont. Good morning.
Les Blomberg, I'm here for Paul Bruja.
Annette Smith, Vermonters for a Clean Environment, and we're sponsoring.
Steve Ambrose, a private or consulting acoustics and dealing with wind turbines for many years.
Ben and Julie Walsh with VPIRG.
Sarah Wolf with VPIRG.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah.
So I can get spellings.
I'm sorry.
I'm going to send around.
Oh yeah, we're going to send around a sign-up sheet so that the court reporter can get the spellings of people who attended and who are speaking. One thing I forgot to mention is that after each presentation, there'll be 15 minutes for questions from people, everybody. And then, just so people know who we are, Kevin Fink is a staff member. Sarah Hoffman is a board member. Jim Bolts, that's my name, I'm the chair. Margaret Cheney is a board member. John Cotter is a staff member, and Tom Nauer is a staff member.
You guys, is the
on the phone, so if people could speak up when they're speaking, and we're going to see if we can turn on the mic, so who's ever presenting will use the mic.
Okay, I think we're ready. Are there any other preliminary matters we need to discuss before we start with the presentation?
Make sure the green dots show.
Is anyone on the phone right now? I'm only asking so that we know whether we need to worry about your being able to hear. I guess we're okay. When you use the mic, you have to push the button to turn it on, and when you're done speaking, you should turn it off because too many mics are on. The system doesn't work right. And you need to really speak clearly into the microphone right in front of your mouth. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So I guess we're ready to hear from VPIRG.
Thank you very much. Again, my name is Sarah Wolf. I'm the Clean Energy Advocate at VPIRG. I'm joined today with Ben and Julie Walsh, the Climate and Energy Program Director at VPIRG. We have been working on this proceeding since the fall and the workshop process that happened then. We were engaged closely with acoustic expert Scott Bodwell of Bodwell and Byro Acoustics, who unfortunately couldn't join us today. Should I hold? Is this the problem if I'm speaking?
All the mics need to be off except the person who's speaking. So if you can make sure your green light's not on, there'll be a green light. Try again.
All right, I will continue. Thank you very much to the board for allowing us time to speak this morning and for your thoughtful consideration of ours and the other parties' comments in this proceeding. Because Mr. Bodwell can't join us today and because we've spent significant time throughout this proceeding discussing the modeling and the monitoring protocols of the proposed rule, I'm not going to dwell as much on that today. As we stated in our comments, we largely support the construction of this rule, and we think it is based on acoustic best practices. We did note several technical areas that could have significant on-the-ground impacts that we would appreciate the board's careful review of to ensure that this rule is not unnecessarily more restrictive than it's intended to be. But because we support the construction of the rule, our primary concern here today is a policy question really rather than a technical acoustic question. And that question is, should this rule set forth in this proceeding allow for the development of wind in this state or not? And we've looked at the research. If we had learned that there were health risks at the levels of sound that we're talking about, we would have advocated for a lower sound standard at the beginning of this proceeding. If we had learned that there were health risks at a sound level so low that wind would not be possible in the state, we would have gone to the legislature and advocated for to not build this technology anymore. This is what we've done. We've successfully advocated for a ban on hydraulic fracturing for those reasons, for a ban on toxic chemicals like BPA and phthalates in children's products. The research doesn't support that ban. The research doesn't support a ban on sound levels at this level, at the levels that we're talking about. It is not supported by the evidence, by precedent, or by Vermont law. I want to discuss, before I move on to the other aspects of this specific rule, just the important context that is in place whenever we have a discussion about energy generation, which is that here in the United States, when we turn on the light switch, we expect the light to come on. That demand is a constant in this discusussion. Even as efficiency and conservation technologies improve and we continue to work to expand our efforts in those areas, we expect, and ISO New England, the Department of Public Service, have forecasted that our energy usage is going to increase, not decrease, over the next few years. And that's largely due to increased investment in electric heating and transportation alternatives. The board is very familiar with the Act 56 Tier 3 implementation process, which encourages the already heavy investment in those areas. That new technology, that increase will call for new generation. And if that new generation does not come from renewable sources, it will come from fossil fuels. Taking a critical renewable energy source off the table right now, which, again, to be clear, that we think this decibel limit will do, means that we're inherently encouraging new fossil fuel generation. I'm not going to dwell here today on the significant proven health and environmental impacts of fossil fuel generation, other than to say that it's clear that the impacts of that generation lies primarily on the communities that host that generation, and that generation is not found in Vermont. and we cannot continue to let other states bear the burden of our energy needs in this way. But also, to be clear, those impacts do not know state lines. Even if the primary impacts do occur to people in other states and in other countries, we still feel them here today, both economically and environmentally. And that's why state policy dictates that we move towards renewable energy and away from fossil fuels and other non-renewable resources. So that's an important context as we continue this discussion and any discussion on renewable energy in the state. As I will discuss, the evidence doesn't support this low of a decibel level as it relates to public health. So what we're talking about is more of an aesthetic or annoyance-based decision. However, based on the studies that we've looked at around annoyance from wind turbines, the nighttime limit of 35 decibels is contrary to Vermont law and the precedent around aesthetic decisions. There are two basic regulatory principles at work here when we're talking about aesthetics in Vermont. The Queechy standard, which holds that noise or negative visual effect is an undue adverse impact when it would be shocking or offensive to the average person, and the common law, which protects landowners when impacts cause substantial interference with a normal person's enjoyment or the use of their property. We looked at a number of these studies that specifically examined annoyance, and it's clear that there is some level of annoyance from wind turbine sound, but the number of respondents who said that they were annoyed at all levels of sound between 35 to 45 decibels was a small minority of the respondents. Neither the Queechy test nor the common law is intended to protect against annoyance from a small minority of residents. This falls far short of the standard of being shocking or offensive to the average person. And by the same token, it couldn't be characterized as a substantial interference with a normal person's enjoyment of their property. So based on this evidence, that neither the Queechy test nor common law support a standard that's this low. It's also unprecedented. And we've talked a lot about how there is no other standard in the US that's as low as what's being proposed here. But I want to dwell a little bit on Denmark and Germany as two jurisdictions that have been brought up frequently throughout this discussion as places that do have comparably low standards and have continued investment in wind power throughout the modern day. Really, that comparison is unsupported. The two lowest land use designations here, the noise-sensitive land use and the purely residential land use, are considered in these countries to be their dense urban zones. This would be the equivalent of where we are today, downtown Montpelier, downtown Burlington, downtown cities in Vermont, having the lowest sound limits. This is an acknowledgement in these countries of the working landscape and the desire to allow the land to be continued to be used for economic and environmental purposes, including renewable energy, and an encouragement for urban density, for people to move into these urban zones. Here in Vermont, we have a similar appreciation and prioritization of the working landscape, a similar acknowledgement that we want it to be continued to be used for those purposes. Most areas with strong wind resource here would be equivalent to the open countryside and heartland mixed villages, mixed areas designations, which are between 42 and 45 dBA. I want to touch a little bit on the studies that were listed in the board's filing, in the source documentation of scientific information list. These studies we went over in detail in our comments, but I've provided a high-level summary here. As you can see, the conclusion from these studies is that none of them support a level of 35 dBA LEQ at 100 feet from the residence, even when discussing annoyance specifically. Most of these studies have an inherent recognition that annoyance can lead to secondary impacts like sleep disturbance, which can lead to tertiary health impacts. These studies take this into consideration when setting their health recommendations, which all either explicitly support a short duration limit of 45 dBA or an annual limit of 40 dBA, which is shown by our experts testing in Maine, which we discussed in our December presentation, would be achieved by a short duration limit of 45 dBA when paired with the conservative modeling approach that has been laid out in this proposed rule. I would also note that the exterior recommendations found in each of these studies are measured at the facade of the home. We very much support the protocol of measuring at 100 feet from the residence, but it's worth noting that, of course, in that 100 feet, the sounds actually measured at the facade of the home would be quieter than those measured 100 feet away. So to reiterate, none of these studies support the nighttime limit set forth in the proposed rule. I'll briefly touch on setbacks. Again, we touched on this significantly in our comments that we filed in January. But I want to be clear that this setback as proposed in this rule is also highly restrictive and unnecessarily so. Given the low decibel limit that has been proposed, the setback is largely duplicative. The restricting factor will be the decibel limit. In the rare instance where the setback is in fact the restricting factor, that setback would be unnecessary since the levels of sound at that residence would clearly be below the set decibel limit. Even if the decibel limit were to be increased, a setback would still be unnecessary for regulating sound because the decibel limit would be set based on public health best practices and would adequately protect against potentially harmful levels of sound. I would also just point to this illustration, which we also shared in our December presentation, as a good example of just how significant the shift from 45 decibels to 35 decibels is. You can see the level of 45 is the inner line of the red band between the yellow and the red, and the level of 35 is the inner band of the white band there. And so you can see it's about 3,000 feet from the middle of the turbine string to the 45 decibel line, and I would estimate that it's over 2 miles to the white decibel line, to the white 35 decibel line. That concludes my presentation, but I'm happy to take any questions from the board or others in the room.
Yeah. So on this map that you just had on the wall, I can see we're 3,000 feet. Did you just say that the white is 2 miles from the turbines in this illustration?
I haven't measured it, so I can't say for certain. I was just looking at the 3,000 feet and then estimating out.
And one more question. You mentioned a small minority as being annoyed, and I'm wondering if you're using, if that is the same as on your next to last slide where you mentioned the 10% annoyance cited by the Health Canada study. Is that what?
That was one of the studies that we looked at. We additionally, in our comments, reviewed several of the primary studies that were cited by the Massachusetts DEP review that actually were the folks who went out and asked these people how they felt. And the numbers found in those, the 2004 study found that 20% described themselves as very annoyed between 37.5 and 40 dBA. 36% described themselves as very annoyed above 40 dBA. And other numbers were similar, actually larger sample size, only 6% in the 37.5 to 40 dBA range, and 15% in the over 40 dBA range reported annoyance out of 754 people that responded in that second study.
Which study are you referring to there?
So these are peer-reviewed studies that were cited by the Massachusetts DEP. This is on page 12 of our comments. This was Peterson and Person Way, their 2004 and their 2007 studies that I just cited.
Thank you.
So you indicate that our nighttime limit is unprecedented. Aren't there some jurisdictions where they're using 10 decibels over ambient as the standard, and thus couldn't they be similar to what we're talking about in our proposed rule?
We're unaware of any place where that 10 decibels over ambient would be treated as low as this, because this is so.
May I offer correction on this, please? I used to work in Massachusetts DEP. I was a state noise analyst, and we took a look at some projects like this in a few locations. We actually did find 1 or 2 spots in the Berkshires where the 10 over level was pretty comparable to what you would have gotten in Vermont. So we actually had 1 or 2 projects we were looking at, which we could not. We took a look at them, and the developer came to the office. We reviewed it carefully, and it was about the ambient was around 25, and it was about 35. So it actually does occasionally happen in some very quiet locations, but that was an extreme case. It only happened once or twice. That's in very hollows of below large mountains.
So I'm sorry, I know we went around at the beginning, but could you identify yourself?
Howard Quinn, the sound consultant. I used to work at Massachusetts DEP. I was the state consultant, the noise analyst for all the wind turbines. So we looked at this a lot.
Thank you. And I would just reiterate that even if sounds were, even if a sounds were so quiet that it would be 10 dB over the ambient. Setting a standard of 30 or 35 dBA based on that is trying is overly extreme based on the studies that are set forth here. So even if there was an occasional or sort of unique instance where that might occur, that would be sort of overly extreme based on the Act 250 review, based on the common law precedent where we're trying to protect the average person, not the sort of unique case.
Ms. Wolf, this is a question about the comments that you submitted in advance of today. So I understand your consultant's not here, so I don't know if you'll be able to answer this or not. But the acousticians in the room, if you could keep this question in mind, and then when it's your turn to present, you could go ahead and answer it at that time. You recommended the proposed rule says for modeling, we should model a receptor location at 4 meters, I think it was, so roughly 14 feet. And then for the operational monitoring phase, the microphone height is set at 4 to 5 feet. And VPIRG recommended that the modeling receptor height be brought down to be consistent with the 4 to 5 feet for the monitoring height. And I was curious, do you know what happens to the output of the model if you lower the model receptor height from 4 meters to 4 or 5 feet?
That would be a question for our expert. This was a comment that he encouraged us to include. It was based on consistency. We think that if the model is going to be consistent with what's ultimately monitored, then the microphone height should be in the same place as the microphone height was essentially modeled to be.
I mean, my understanding is that the point of modeling the receptor up at that height is because it's assuming that there are bedrooms on the second floor of a house. And so I'm curious if you know, or if other folks can address it when their turn comes up, if consistency is that important, should we be lowering the modeling receptor height or raising the microphone height for monitoring purposes?
I won't address that question. I'll leave that to the other acousticians in the room.
Thanks. I didn't mean to ambush you with it.
No, it's okay. I appreciate the question.
In your written comments, you state that the proposed rule would be a functional ban on wind development in Vermont. Do you have an opinion as to whether it's the proposed decibel level or the setback or both?
So certainly the more restricting factor is the decibel level. However, we would be very concerned with even just the setback, as we feel it's unnecessarily restrictive and would likely take a lot of potential wind sites off the table.
Okay. And I know earlier in the proceeding, if memory serves, VPIRG was supportive of a 45 decibel level. Am I accurate in characterizing that?
Yeah.
Above 35, is there a level that would not be a functional ban?
Well, we continue to support a level of 45 as paired with the conservative modeling practices that's currently set forward. We would also support a level of 42 if the modeling parameters were set to match what's happening in Maine. Currently, they are even more conservative than what's happening in Maine. And so with 42, it would potentially still take too many sites off the table. But we would support that if it was made to match what is working in Maine with a level of 42 in very similar terrain.
So is it VPIRG's opinion that anything below 42 would serve as a functional ban?
We would have to look at exactly what the modeling parameters were, but we were very concerned, even at the level of 40 in the draft rule in February, with the conservative modeling parameters, that would not allow for more wind in the state.
Two brief points to add. One, we haven't asked the acoustic engineer that we contracted with to review 35, 36, 30, each decibel level on up. And then I'd also refer back to your earlier comments that made clear, and Sarah referenced this in her presentation today, that with this kind of conservative modeling, we're actually talking about a decibel level that's significantly lower than the number on the page in the limit. And that's why we think that, you know, pairing something in that 42 to 45 range with this kind of conservative modeling is actually quite protective from a public health standpoint, and perhaps even a little bit more restrictive than is strictly necessary to be protective of public health.
Any other questions from anybody? Okay, thank you. I think we're ready for Vermonters for a Clean Environment.
Okay.
They have some computer technical
Would you like
things
to just
set up,
take
so I'll
this?
make some
Sure.
comments while they're doing that.
Okay. Can you
Vermonters,
identify yourself for the record?
yes,
We know who you are.
Annette Smith, Executive Director of Vermonters for a Clean Environment. We have been working in the public interest with the neighbors on these issues for 8 years. And I would like to make the distinction that while Vermont Public Interest Research Group has those words in their name, they're actually representing the industry, and their interest is to see more wind development. Our interest is to make sure that the people of Vermont are not harmed by the industry. And it's been consistent throughout our work on many issues in the state. And so we are here to assure that people's health is protected, that people's quality of life is protected, that people have the peaceful enjoyment of their properties, and that they don't have to do what we've watched happen, which is people abandoning their homes and getting sick as a result of the wind industry. We are strong supporters of renewable energy and want to see the renewable energy business succeed, and believe that what has happened in recent years has actually caused more opposition because we have not addressed the noise issues in an effective way. And so we know that the standards that we have aren't working at 45, and so we appreciate very much this opportunity to educate, and it looks like we're ready, so
Yeah.
thank you.
Can someone shut the lights down, please? Because I ended up using white for a lot of my slides.
Hey, could you identify yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My name is Stephen Ambrose. I'm on the bottom of the slide. I've been an acoustician, noise control engineer, environmental acoustics, 40 plus years. And it's a profession I have thoroughly enjoyed, having come from a background in civil engineering. And I have learned this trade by doing. And one thing I learned early on from my mentors was people do not complain about how loud the sound is. They complain about how loud it is above background. And the correlation, we basically said, it makes it very simple for a noise control engineer. It's much easier to put a noisy noise source in a noisy environment than to put a noisy noise source in a quiet environment. And this is what happens with quiet. Sound travels great distances. It's when it runs into the background sound level that it disappears. Urban areas, you end up having the sound level disappear into the background fairly close to the noise source, because there are so many other man-made noise sources participating in the environment. What happens in quiet areas, it's quiet. There aren't any other noise sources. And to end up saying that wind exists as a noise source is false, and I will discuss that. Wind is a contaminant. We do not want wind on the microphone because it distorts and ruins measurements. So, I'm here because I'm frustrated by my profession. They have lost track of why we do noise control engineering, and that is so industry can be good acoustic neighbors. I know when I succeed doing my work, when the client and the neighbor says, gee, Steve, is that all the noise there is? That's not bad. That's success. When you put something out there and they go, oh, that's awful, you've missed your mark. The hard part of noise control engineering, which is a wind turbine, is making it fit into the environment that it's in. And you have to use your ears. Your ears are the most powerful tool. A sound level meter is nothing more than a voltmeter. that's been designed to measure the response of a microphone. It only measures volts. There's no intelligence to it. They can collect lots of numbers, no intelligence. Okay. This is what I have observed in Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts, throughout the country. We have acoustic experts who are missing the mark. We have international standards that do not address people sufficiently. We have measurement protocols that deal on the science of the measurement, not on the listening of the neighbor. And it's not working, and it's sad. Okay, here I am, my background. I've been doing private consulting since 1990. I worked for Shaw Group and Stone and Webster, and they kept calling me back to work, so I worked into the 2000s. 2010, I think, was the last time I worked with the Shaw Group. I love my profession. And I've kind of gone through this already. U.S. regulators, you're not the experts in acoustics. I'm the expert. You tell me how loud you want it to be. And if you tell me it's too loud, I go back to my experience that says, no, 45 is too loud because the area is so quiet. You need to address the neighbor. You do not want complaints. I've hit on this. Noticeable increase in noise level, loudness when it warbles, objectionable sound character like a Harley-Davidson motorcycle, tonal frequencies like a bad ballast transformer and a fluorescent light, or if it interferes with normal human activity, a conversation. If a Harley goes by, you have to kind of pause your conversation, wait till the sound goes away, and then pick it up again. The most critical is sleep. And this is where lives are being devastated. I know of 2 people, and I have met one of them, who have committed suicide because they could not leave their home for relief from their wind turbine. Sad. This is why we are here. This, I could end my speech, my presentation right here. If you look at the red line, this is based on EPA studies that go back to the 1950s, 60s, 70s. Those dots represent samples of communities being classified and the human response to noise level. What I have done is I have normalized the receptor background sound level. It's kind of twisted what the EPA had done. So I can end up saying, well, how loud can a sound be in this environment? And I look at the studies and I go, old rule, strong appeals to stop the noise. What's the sound level? 40 to 45 dBA. I mean, amazing. And you look at those gray lines, those are the Pedersen and Way studies. Strong correlation with EPA. Amazing. And Vermont being in green at the bottom, those are the sound levels were in most communities, 25, 27 dBA, and quieter. But one of the things about the human response is, when does it interfere with activity? And the most sensitive activity is sleep. And the trigger point, the onset, is 30 dBA. And so what I have always ended up saying, if I'm in an environment that's 15 and I want to protect people, I can go up to 30 dBA, a 15 dB increase, or even maybe, well, marginally 35. So the noise level increase is much more generous and the very, very low. But the trigger point is sleep, which is 30 dBA, the onset. Now, some people, like my wife, you can haul her away in the bed when she's sleeping and she won't even wake up, she's on the 40 dBA sound or above. But most of the population is in the range of 30 to 35. A good compromise, 35 dBA. That's, and you will find other evidence I'm going to present that shows that. And my feeling is with Maine, since we know, excuse me, with Vermont, we know the environment is quiet. Why don't we just mandate we have a quiet environment, except in our urban areas? Burlington, and let me tell you, having been there at night, that's quiet after the bars close and the college kids are snoozing. So, the ambient baseline for Vermont, 27 dBA. Even though it gets down to 22, 25, even RSG is measured 19 at sites. You've adopted a 42 for daytime. That's reasonable. EPA would end up saying daytime ends at 7 p.m. So you set a noise limit of 35 dBA. Well, this agrees with ANSI S12.9, Part 3, which most acousticians should use as a guideline for when do people complain. And when you want to end up having compliance measurements, you want an observer, someone to listen there. What's the first thing I do when I get out of a car to do a noise measurement? Do I hear the noise source? I mean, it's that simple. And if I don't, then I go to the operator and say, what's going on? He says, oh, we shut it down for maintenance. So, it's simple. If you're going to do a wind turbine noise measurement, you better hear the turbine. And for wind turbines, they're worst when they're above 60% power. But I'd like to measure it 80 to 100%. Okay. I spent 2 weeks off and on trying to read your sound rule. It is about, I can't believe it. When I grew up, was learning this profession, sound regs were 1 page. Gave the limit and followed international standards, almost. This one got so twisted. Have experts transform a simple sound assessments to very complicated, thereby making enforcement impossible. That's where you're at. It's unbelievable. And this is the one that gets me the most. These companies work for the Mass DEP and Clean Energy to promote wind turbines. And they have captured you, regulatory boards in Massachusetts, in Vermont, and around the country. I cannot believe it. People who are basically installing wind turbines, writing the rules. Careful. And this is my, I just said that, pardon me. Okay. Ambient sound measure, verify. What's verify mean? Listen. Acousticians have well-documented environments. Matter of fact, here's a company, highly respected, HMMH. They have got a noise thermometer that shows quiet rural nighttime. It's about 25 dBA. Look where Lowell and Sheffield are, 20. That was measured. Here's another company. They're in agreement. Same thermometer, different presentation. Measurements have to be made in proper locations. Out in the open, away from obstructing noise or noise sources. Wind in trees. Why put a microphone under a tree if you're going to hear a leaf rustle? It raises the ambient. It's a false measurement. Putting it near a snowmobile trail you're gonna get a high LEQ because the loud snowmobile goes zipping by, only a matter of seconds, contaminates the measurement for that period. Here we got microphones in the woods. This is here in Vermont. The windscreens are so close to the branches that I can't tell for sure, but if a leaf rubs against the windscreen, it's going to make a fuzzy sound. Contaminated measurement. This one gets the heck out of me. Here we've got microphone out in the field exposed to wind, and the anemometer is behind the trees, not exposed to wind. So we're going to get microphone wind noise with no wind speed. And this is the coup de grace. This happened in Massachusetts. First set of measurements were made in the trees. Second set of measurements made in front of a reflecting house for a compliance test. Not good. And these were plotted. They gave the coordinates and plotted them. This is where the I have to curb my tongue. They're only estimates. Wind turbines are measured at test facilities. They're flat ground for miles. And they measure at 1.5 times the height of the hub. So they're in the near field to the wind turbine. Because you really need to get 3 to 5 height distances away before you get into the far field where the sound spreads out in a predictable pattern. ISO 9613, the rule that they use to regulate or to predict, it only predicts the long-term average for stable weather. Remember, they measure flat ground. Varying topography, like in Vermont, has all kinds of weather. We do not understand the layering of the atmosphere with altitude. Different wind speeds, different temperatures, different humidities, all those variables in there. When we're in close to the noise source, those variables have very little impact. But as we get farther and farther away, they become more significant. So, the noise model is only good for 1,000 meters, 3,300 feet away. And it has an accuracy of plus or minus 3 dB. The height difference between the noise source and the receiver should be 30 meters. No greater than that. Because the model doesn't work. It hasn't been calibrated for that. And I'm going to show you why. I did the layering structure, but here's from the CAD to model, the people who write prediction models for the noise standard. Problem, nobody knows layer structure. This is why the models are deficient. And that was from a lead writer for CAD. Okay. In IA 9613, which is the standard, it tells that it's a ground which is approximately flat horizontally or with a constant slope. This section disqualifies itself. You can't use ground attenuation. The alternate method is only valid for dBA. Wind turbines are very rich in low frequencies, so dBA is not really an appropriate term to use at all. So, what that means is ground attenuation doesn't exist in the model. It's basically, it should not be used, should not be permitted, because it's going to introduce an error between 2 and 4 dB if used. depending on the distance. Now this is one that's going to take a while to go through. The bottom is distance. Then on the y-axis is height, 30 meters. This is the differential height. Everything underneath that yellow line is where the model has an accuracy. And above that line, which is all of Vermont, the model doesn't work. It does not work. You have to go back to the basics. Sound power level, predicted to a distance with atmospheric absorption. That's about the basic that you can get. And the problem with wind turbines is when you get far away and they're up on a ridge, they're not a point source. They are a line source. The difference between a point source and a line source is they decrease at different rates. A point source decreases at 6 dB per doubling in distance, which means if 90 at 50 feet, at 100 feet it's going to be 84, and at 200 feet it will be 78. That's how it decreases. A cylinder, much smaller decrease. Wind turbines, when you're at a neighbor's house, appear as a line source. It's a much lower. This is why we're getting errors here of predictions that are under what they measure. And it's not because they're measuring wind, they're measuring wind contamination. This was done years ago. And I remember it was done by Ron Hornjeff, a consultant. He's retired in Massachusetts. He looked at all these wind turbines that are operating and compared predicted versus measured. And we normalized it to what the level of predicted was, being 0. So all those red bars indicate how much the model missed it from the actual measurements. Kibbe. That's a huge site. And they're all missing 3 to 12 dB. What I was taught at Stone and Webster, since we have unknowns about our noise source, how loud it actually can be, and how the atmosphere works, we put in a design margin. Depending on the source, it would be 3 to 5 dB to account for this, so that we would not surprise the neighborhood with, "Whoa, it's louder than we thought." Okay. Up there is 2 noise prediction models. One is the NORD 2000, which is a European model that's being used, and it's versus the ISO 9613-2, which is predominantly used here. Wanted to point out that the measured is an actual level, the predicted is an estimate. You look at the red line there, that's the NORD model, and those little diamonds represent the measurements. The green, the ISO, is down the bottom of the curve, and you can see in the 500 hertz band, it's missing by 5 dB. That is why we have to be careful with noise models. They're not more accurate than a measurement, because the measurement accounts for what nature is doing to the sound. I'm sorry, the baby had to come back. I tried to read this and understand what it meant. And my little friend, same amount of hair I have, they can go on forever because you've got to keep getting 12 samples, and they get to choose which samples get put into the protocol. And they use a technique called binning, which means how's the measurement compared to what we predicted. And if it's too loud, we can end up saying, well, that's wind noise, that's contamination, we can throw that data out. And I took 12 measurements. And I had 5 that exceeded the noise limit. Yet when you average all 12 together, they complied at 35. Yet when you do the true math in acoustics where you add logarithmically, they exceeded. People don't take a year, 6 months, an hour to decide that they like a sound. They let you know in an instant. It really is. It's just, if they know the sound is temporary, they will tolerate it. When they don't, they know it's forever, they're persistent. Here is the simplest of compliance tests. Turbine on, turbine shut down, with an impact assessment. I'm sorry that the... Is there a focus on this? Am I-
That's better.
Yeah, just too bright in this room. It was great on my wall at the house. But you can see the amplitude modulation of the turbine, the fluctuation that people always complain about. It's always one thump thump. Then they go into the shutdown, and that's where you get that rising peak, because the blades now aren't working efficiently and everything is starting to shut down. And as it goes down, you get that little blip, which is as the mechanicals kick in, and then it's off. And there on the bottom, that's the ambient. And what it's saying there, it's 27 dBA in the ambient. The peaks are at 46. Well, that looks like a 20 dB increase. Yes, people will complain. What I tacked on the end of this is an impact assessment. And it says the people will complain, widespread complaints. Yeah, it sounds awful. Appeals to stop the noise. Sounds like Vermont. And this was done way back. Wind masking. Faux argument. These are rationales that are being used. These are all faux. The only way you can get these to work is when you average the data over time. And if I was to speak, and you're going to listen to my average sound to make an evaluation of what I've said, this is what it would be. Doesn't work. It just hides everything, everything. And this is Carl Bolin. His doctoral thesis shows that a wind turbine can be heard 10 dB quieter than the ambient sound level. It's because of its unique acoustic signature, its sound character. We recognize things because we can process a signal to noise ratio. We can pull information out. Infrasound. This is serious. I can speak from personal experience. I have been a wind turbine victim of this infrasound. Any of you on the board motion sick? Prone to motion sickness? Because if you are, beware. If you're not, you're blessed. I was a radio navigator in the service, and people used to joke, says, why don't we give Ambrose an air sick bag with a clear bottom so he can navigate while he's sick. No, we never got lost, and I was always able to navigate, but it's a miserable feeling, absolutely. And this graph here shows what it looked like outdoors, kind of a fuzzy black line, but indoors, due to the structure of the house filtering out a lot of the higher frequencies, these are the pressure pulsations that are occurring in the house that the ear senses and the brain responds to. And this is me, nauseogenic frequency, motion sickness. This is with the ISO standard. It shows as the wind turbines are getting bigger and bigger, they're getting lower in frequency. So they have moved down into the nauseogenic range. Early on, wind turbines did not do that. But once you get into the 1 hertz range and lower, you're going to be sick. And I will give you this slide. I just wasn't able to print it out. And this is my evidence doing the Bruce McPherson study, and it has been a peer-reviewed report. And we correlated about 3 months after the fact that the reason why we were having such a hard time getting data is because we were sick. And when we plotted our journals of measurements and what we're measuring and what we're doing and how we felt, and we knew nothing then about wind turbine syndrome. Nothing. It turned out there was a strong correlation to electric power output to how we felt. So I think we validated Sue and Ed Hobart in their house. We met them. 5 minutes later they told us, use our house. They invited us in. We set our instruments up on the dining room table. They bought dinner, brought it in from a restaurant, and then they said, the beds are made up. We're going to go sleep elsewhere. We're taking the dogs. Abandoned their dream home to us. That's the 3rd time. I've had 2 others do it to me. Okay. This is what your noise standard does not, your noise rule does not address. Wind turbines cause these, they're not audible, but lots of well-being, you know, feeling good about yourself, feeling good about being at home. Cognitive ability. How about having